Hello, this is Sammy Tippett, president of Sammy Tippett Ministries. My ministry is an international ministry in over 80 countries. I've been ministering for over 40 years now, and it's been an exciting life traveling and sharing the good news of God's love with people around the world. I was real excited when I saw Breitling put up this blog, and I talked to him about it. And one of the things that excites me about it is he sees that prayer is a part of strategy in anything you do, whether it's investing or in life. And so for me, that has been real close to my heart, because people have asked me as I've gone into countries, and we've kind of really pointed our ministry towards difficult places that other people would not go and that are very difficult. And people said, how do you get this strategy that you have? And I've said it's prayer, and prayer is the strategy. And a lot of people don't understand that. So I was real excited when I saw Breitling put this up and talk about investing in prayer and investing in that in such a way that you make it a part of your strategy, because it really has been. And so I wanted to share some things. I talked to him about this, and some things that I think will be of great encouragement to you, because there's some things happening in the world today. Iraq is a part of it. What's taking place on the street in the Middle East is a part of what's going on in the world. But I think there's a bigger picture, and a picture that often we don't see, and it's really related to prayer. And the reason I say that is because in the past 40-something years, I've seen incredible things happen in our world. I was a part of what took place in Eastern Europe during the time of the fall of communism, and when that collapsed, and I saw the important role of prayer, and how when a revolution took place and people received freedom and their economy changed, their whole way of life changed, prayer was something that was taking place underneath it and did not get reported on by the news media. And I believe that I can show historical facts and documents to where prayer actually was what precipitated all of those things that took place. Now, and it was a part of the strategy of what I believe was in God's heart anyway, for His people to really pray and seek Him, and a whole nation, a whole region of the world was changed. So as we look at Iraq, as we look at investments, as we look at what's taking place right now, I think that prayer has got to be a part of the strategy. Not only a part of the strategy, but a very important piece of that strategy. So let me tell you why I feel that, first of all, and talk about that a little bit. I was involved in Eastern Europe since 1973. I went there when people said, well, you can't really go into Eastern Europe and do anything because it's too dangerous for Christians to go in. And I was going in and actually preaching and sharing Christ, working with young people all throughout Eastern Europe when people said you can't do that. The only thing you can do is smuggle Bibles, they would say, or something like that. But as I prayed, and one of the things that happened in my life and ministry was this, that I remember praying a prayer early on saying, God, put me in a place where I'm in the place of the impossible, where I cannot do it in my own power and my own strength, where I need you and I need to depend upon you. Well, that happened. That dependency took place, and God thrust us into a ministry that went into places that were people said you just can't get into those kind of places. One of the countries that we went into, and I'll talk about some of the other countries like the collapse of the Berlin Wall, where there was a prayer movement that preceded that, and some of those who were involved in seeing the collapse of the Berlin Wall were involved in this prayer movement, and that never got reported on, and in just very few places was it talked about. But one of the countries that was so close to my heart, and I saw just what I believe to be perhaps the greatest miracle of the last century, was the nation of Romania. And the situation there was much like the time of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And so you had a very similar situation. There were a lot of things. You had an evil dictator. You had a dictator that persecuted people, that murdered people, that did horrible things. In fact, Ambassador David Funderburk under the Reagan administration, when he was ambassador there, actually resigned his position as ambassador to protest the atrocities that were being committed against evangelical Christians. So there was this great persecution that was taking place at that particular time. I was going into Romania. I went into Romania in 1980 for the first time. And when I went in, I saw something that it just blew me away. I could not believe what I was seeing. We went into a city called Oradea, and I went to a church. I was asked to bring a music group that would reach out to young people. And so I went into this church, And of course, no one knew that I was coming because this was all secretive. There were only a couple of people who knew, who set this up for us to come. We arrived at the church an hour before the service was to start, and this was in the middle of the week, a middle of the week service. We arrived there an hour before it was to start to set up the sound equipment, all of that, with the music group, and I couldn't believe what I saw. The church was packed. Now, no one knew that we were coming. No one knew that there was a special meeting. It was packed an hour before the service started. And when I say packed, you have to understand what I mean. People were, every place was taken. People were standing down the aisle, around the platform area. People were standing outside in the streets. And I asked the question, why are all these people here an hour before the service? They were there to pray. You see, something had happened just a few years before that. There was a pastor there who was a great man of prayer, and he taught the people to pray, to really seek God's face. And we taught them to pray in an unusual way. He said, I want you to pray that one day we would be able to stand in the great football stadiums and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, and on radio and television and in the newspapers. Well, everyone said, hey, Pastor, that could never happen. Don't you understand? We're thrown in prison. We lose our jobs. We lose our education if we're known as followers of Christ. So that can never happen. So, Pastor, I can't believe you're telling us this. We could even lose our lives. And the pastor said this. He quoted the words of Jesus, and he said, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. You pray. And a handful of people caught that vision, and a prayer movement was birthed, and all of a sudden people began to pray, and there was a great spiritual awakening that just spread across that whole northwestern region of Romania. No matter where we went, to the churches, every place, it didn't matter where we were, and no one knew we were coming. Whatever church we went to, we had a very secretive places set out for us, and we went to those places, and everywhere it was the same thing. Churches packed, overflowing, people standing outside. And this was in the midst of great persecution. It was in the midst of great darkness. There was great economic crisis in the country at the time, and it just looked impossible. But the pastor had taught them to pray. Now, the government became very inflamed over this, so what they did was they deported the pastor. They got rid of him, but the problem was they couldn't stop the prayers of God's people. And so the people continued praying. And as they continued praying, the church kept growing, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and expanding. And all the while, it was getting darker. The persecution got worse. The economic situation got worse. I traveled 2 or 3 times a year into Romania, and from 1980 until 1988. And all through that time, pastors would be told, Sammy Tippett will not be allowed back in this country. And miraculously, God would open the doors, and I would get back in the country. We would go expecting at the border crossing any time that they would say, no, you can't. I had friends who were turned away, who were taken off planes, sent back. But God kept getting us in. We kept praying and seeking God, and God got us in. 1988, I was going into Romania. I was on a train. The train was stopped for 2 hours. Some soldiers came out, and they pulled me off the train, and they put me on another train, sent me back to Austria, and this is what they said to me. They said, you will never, as long as you live, you will never set your feet on Romanian soil again. Well, there was something they didn't know. They didn't know the power of prayer among those people in Romania. In fact, the Romanian Christians sent me they smuggled a message out to the West and sent it to me. And it said, Sammy, don't be discouraged. Keep praying. Remember that God's glory often comes through the most difficult circumstances. And they prayed. That was 1988. 1989, of course, the Berlin Wall fell. People began to ask me. They said, Sammy, what do you think? Will Romania be next? And I said, well, you know, and I was, to be honest, I was a little negative because I said, you know, East Germany is different from Romania. I mean, Ceausescu had the reputation for being the harshest and the most ruthless dictator. I mean, he came down and people believed, you know, I mean, when we would go into homes, people would be very quiet. We'd have to sneak into their homes late at night to visit with them. And so it was a very difficult. And I said, it's different from East Germany. I don't know. But in Christmas of 1989, there was something incredible that happened. There was a pastor who was to be arrested, and Christians from all over the city, from all the various backgrounds, came together and made a circle around his apartment. And the secret police came and fired into the crowd, killing innocent men, women, and children. And when the blood of the martyrs began to flow into the streets of Timișoara, that city, all of a sudden there was a release of God's glory among his people. 200,000 people gathered in the main square to protest what had happened. Now, these were all people who had been indoctrinated from kindergarten to postgraduate university level that there's no God. And so they'd been taught all of their lives that atheism, scientific atheism. They gathered there in the square, and all of a sudden, in one divine moment, it was as though the spirit of atheism was literally blown out of the country. And people began to shout, "Există Dumnezeu, există Dumnezeu, există Dumnezeu," which translated means, there is a God, there is a God, there is a God. And faith erupted in the hearts of the people. Friends of mine called and said, "Sammy, you must come back in. You must immediately come back in." And I went into the country, and I went to the very border crossing where they said I'll never be allowed back in the country. When I arrived there, they came out, and normally the first question they asked was, "Do you have a Bible?" If you had Bibles, you were in trouble. But when I got there, they called us out of the car, and they said this. They said, "Are you Christians?" And I remember my heart was beating. I said, "Yes," because I knew my name was in their computers. I said, "Yes, it is. Yes, we are Christians." And then I'll never forget what that guard said. He threw his arms open wide, and he said, "Welcome to the new Romania." I couldn't believe it. I fell on my knees and began to worship God. We went into the country. People on the streets, I'm not talking about church people now, I'm talking about just people on the streets, would run up to us and begin to shout, "There is a God, there is a God, there is a God." What the news media, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox News, none of them reported was that the theme song of the revolution was a song about the second coming of Christ. In fact, a pastor friend of mine stood and began to speak, and as he began to speak, people would shout, "There is a God," and they got on their knees and prayed with him the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." It was an amazing thing that took place at that moment. This spread to every major metropolitan center in the country. It was the most amazing thing. A few months after that, I stood for the first time in the history of Romania in a football stadium. And just as I stood to speak, my interpreter said, "Sammy, do you know what today is?" I said, "What do you mean? What's today?" He said, "Today is the day that God answered the prayers that our pastor taught us to pray." I was overwhelmed. I fell on my knees. God had changed a nation. If God could do that in Romania, I became convinced there's no place too dark. There's no place too difficult. And so as you think about your strategy for your life, for our nation, for other nations, for Iraq, for your investments, for what you're going to do with your life, the great strategy is to pray. When we pray, there is nothing that is impossible because we are dealing with a God who is the God of the impossible and who changes the impossible. You say, "Sammy, is all this true?" One of the things that I appreciated about Breitling is he sticks with facts. And then Jerry Jenkins, many of you may have heard of, he wrote the Left Behind series. He's co-author of the Left Behind series. Great thing. He wrote my biography, and we've documented this in that. And we have some pictures of that book, God's Secret Agent, some other books that I have on prayer. And you can get some more of that information, or you can go to our website at sammytippett.org, or to another website with a book, The Race. It's called www.thebooktherace.com. And we have a lot of this stuff documented. You'll find it there. And I hope that you'll be be blessed by this. And I'm going to come back tomorrow and share some more things. I'll try to share some stories and some things that will encourage you about what can happen when you pray. So I look forward to talking to you some more. Bye-bye.